Just tuvo, Beto. It's over.
Pues, ¿qué chingado traes? Why the fuck you let these putos disrespect you like that for, se?
Hey, you take it easy, carnal.
You're ranking it for the rest of the homeboys.
Hey, I'm just showing this homeboy around, okay? It's Miklo, from my barrio.
You're the sucker that does the spider. Well, if a rep is what you're looking for, killer, then I'm the man you want. Mira, 3 puntos like Spider. Ooh, I'm the boogeyman. He pissed in his pants. Pinche vato loco.
Come on, carnal.
Get the fuck out of here before I make you my bitch.
It's 3 puntos, ese?
Hey, that's street bullshit, ese. It's different in a joint. We click together for power to protect ourselves. So 3 puntos or anybody strong enough to stand with La Onda is okay.
What's La Onda?
Some questions you don't ask.
That's good. Move it over.
From them man.
Dead man walk in. Back up. Back it up. Up. Escort.
Hello Scenesters, welcome to November, and already we will be celebrating a big Mexican holiday together.
Yeah, we'll celebrate a big Mexican holiday together. Dia De Los Muertos. Day of the Dead.
And looking at the definitive Chicano movie, Blood In, Blood Out. And why do we say Chicano and not Hispanic or Latino?
Growing up is, yo, hey, Mexican. You know, I'm not Mexican. I've never even been to Mexico, you know. But I knew I wasn't white, and I knew I wasn't black or Asian. And when I first heard Chicano, it was my uncle who was a policeman. My dad was a policeman too. He said, some guy wanted him to charge $200 for fixing his car. He said, $200, man, give me a piece of tin foil and a pair of pliers, I'll fix it. I'm a Chicano mechanic. And I go, Chicano, that's it. That's the guy, that's the can-do spirit, man. You know, that's a rascuache raised to an art form. And I want to be a Chicano, and that's the first time I ever heard a word that described me.
Sorry for being a few days late, but this movie is a powerhouse.
Perdóname, apa. Not now! Not ever! You are dead to me like Juanito.
I don't think there's a Mexican American my age that hasn't seen this movie. It's basically the standard for Hispanic culture in movies. Not only is it the greatest Mexican American culture movie ever created, it's also one of, if not the greatest prison movies. Yes, possibly even better than Shawshank, and especially the best movie ever about prison gangs. It's got political and social commentary, gangs, drugs, the justice and penal system, as well as one of the greatest and most clever diplomatic intrigue little subplots ever put in a film, the assassination of La Onda captain Montana Chikura, which I'm going to talk about in part 2. I've got so much to talk about, I'm doing this video in 2 parts. Interesting bit of trivia, director Taylor Hackford also produced The Devil's Advocate, and worked on An Officer and a Gentleman. And did you know he was married to Helen Mirren? This movie almost didn't get released. It was owned by Disney of all companies, and they felt it might be too controversial following the LA riots and how audiences responded to American Me. So they delayed its release and tried to change its title from Blood In, Blood Out to Bound by Honor, but most people call it Blood In, Blood Out. More than that, this movie is just about life. How life takes us through ups and downs, how major events can bring people together or tear them apart, and how our talents and personalities set us on a path, La Onda. La Onda is the path towards our destinies and towards character development. That's what we'll be talking about today, is the concept of character development as depicted in the rough prison philosophy of La Onda. But stay tuned for part 2, while I explain in detail the Montana Chikura assassination. But first, if you're new here, this is Psychology in Movies, and I'm Movie Review Justin. If you're new, that's great. If you're returning, even better. But here at Psychology in Movies, we love taking our favorite films and examining them for psychological, social, motivational, or philosophical themes. or taking a topic and looking for a movie to use as an example. Movies are powerful ways to tell stories that teach us about topics in ways a dry textbook or clinical definition can't. Because with movies, we become attached to the characters on screen, and this invites us to have a genuine empathy and emotions regarding the situation. We don't just read or memorize something from a book, we feel and understand it through example. So with that in mind, let's get into our discussion of Blood In, Blood Out, centered around our concept of la onda, or character development.
Simón. You white bitch, give me some chon chon.
For those of you born under a rock, our film is about three young men living in Los Angeles in the late 1970s, and at the crossroads of turning 18 and having their whole lives ahead of them. A series of life events takes them from committing petty mischief and hooliganism and drags them into a sort of turf war which results in lives forever being changed. From there, our young triad all go in different life paths that occasionally intersect and intertwine, or take them in completely different directions and put them at odds with one another. Main character Miklo, who the film spends most of the time following around, ends up in prison for a murder done in self-defense. Paco joins the Marines and later becomes a narcotics police officer, and Cruz falls into poverty and drug addiction after battling chronic pain, guilt, and depression from the loss of a family member. So you see how already their lives are already moving on different paths in response to the same events. How different people respond to a shared event gives us a lot of insight and perspective that we may not otherwise have, especially when everything is believable and makes sense. What about our topic though? So what is La Onda and what does it mean? La Onda refers to the gang Miklo joins in prison for power and protection, but it also refers to their philosophy, which is equal parts military and equal parts spiritual. And basically it's an all-or-nothing philosophy where a man risks his life for his path, or his Onda, or purpose. But what is his Onda then? We've talked about purpose a bit already on this channel, but that video about Maslow was by no means exhaustive on the subject. Blood In, Blood Out is very interesting because it tackles this subject of purpose from a different angle using the concept of Onda, which is a unique type of character development. Onda is a huge topic, but it's basically using everything about you, from your personality and talents, to how your experiences shape who you are and develop your character, eventually leading you to become a master of your environment. La Onda is the idea that you were put on this earth for a reason, to do things that only you could do. We'll be talking about how our struggles shape our personality, how character development unlocks things out of us, and lastly how talents set us on a life path. And all of this together is part of the concept of La Onda. And if you feel there's more to it, let me know in the comments. Agree, disagree, sort of agree, tell it to the judge. Nah, I'm just kidding. This first section is going to be about personality, but I gotta give more context first. A lot of people might think the first major event in the movie is Miklo busting Spider's window, or maybe even later when Spider retaliates against Cruz and all of that culminates in this. But if you think about it, it actually starts way before the movie even begins. So the movie technically starts with Miklo arriving back in East Los, but we find out he's fleeing a court-ordered probation where he was supposed to stay with his dad. A seemingly small but important theme that really resonated with me personally is how Miklo is half white, half Hispanic. And you know, how he's kind of viewed as a sort of like outsider or tourist, but he still wants to gain acceptance and recognition. I think this character's experiences are dead on to what a lot of people like myself experienced aside from the gangbanging, but especially, you know, with the standing out. Probably even more so in the 70s and 80s, whereas today most families are a lot more multicultural anyway. Back in the day though, you were definitely the odd person out and you stood out a lot more. The reason why I bring this up though is because, you know, looking white has always made it to where Miklo has to work that much harder to fit in. And he lacks a father figure on top of that, so this will push him automatically to gain the acceptance of the boys around him. It's my speculation that Miklo is probably on probation because he was likely trying to impress and gain the approval of the neighborhood gang through doing something stupid and illegal. And you might say that's just conjecture, but what do you call this then? But my overall point is this is how Miklo's character begins. He's a young man who is always kind of the odd man out, and he's viewed as a sort of rich white boy who can leave any time. He's a tourist. And so he's eager to prove that he's not just some white boy, that he's heavily involved with the cholo life. He wants to show that he can be a leader, a soldier, someone to depend on, and someone that belongs and brings value. Paco and Cruz characters are also shaped by their problems and fears as young men. Notice how domineering and full of machismo Paco is. I'm sure Chicanos around the world are going to say that that's just Chicano nature, but more likely it's because he lost his dad and felt threatened by his mom's new husband, Mano, who's like a tough Marine drill sergeant type. He's really not that mean or tough, but as a kid, someone like Tio Mano scared the shit out of us. I actually like Tio Mano in this movie, even though his part is real small. Some of the scenes that actually made me emotional during the movie are seeing him break down at various parts. We all had a Tio Mano in our family, a real tough, hard-working, strict type dad who didn't allow any swearing and had kept tight curfews, so we hated hanging out at his house. But now that I'm older, I see how much a Tio Mano type loved his family and just wanted to protect them because life is so precious. But their lives were so tough with so much work, they could be pretty miserable at times. So I get it from Paco's perspective as well. Everything about Paco is so he can be dominant, so other people can't tell him what to do. The big muscles, the hat, the boxing, the cocky demeanor, all of these are defensive walls he has put up to protect himself. It's also other people will assume he's the leader, and this will protect him from stuff like this. And you can tell it's something he's insecure about because he struggles with it from older characters like his mom, or Mano, or even the police, who kind of just tried to be nice and polite to him, but he has a real problem with authority. And his solution and personality is to become the authority himself then, that way he doesn't have to listen to other people. It's really all about being a rebel. At first by being the ringleader in his gang, Los Vatos Locos, but then later by becoming a narcotics detective, which even then, he kind of acts more like a gangster than a police officer. And even going beyond that by holding on to a lot of self-righteous viewpoints as the movie progresses. By taking a moral high ground on certain issues, he is hiding behind his badge a little bit, which I'll explain later. But he is building up yet another wall, where he doesn't have to deal with other people's opinions of him, or understand their points of view. We'll get into more of that later, this is just the groundwork. And then for Cruz, his mom got sick, and so as a child he spent a lot of time drawing pictures for her. This gave him a tremendous talent, but later on he has no other tools to cope with hard situations, and so he turns into escapism and feeding into guilt after his little brother Juanito dies. Cruz is probably the character we see the least, but I still think that we get enough of his background to see why certain things led him down a path with some dark times. The reason I talk about this is because I think a big part of our personality isn't random, but it's born in response to the problems around us during childhood. Humans are problem solvers, and so we spend a lot of time developing a personality most suited for solving the problems that are immediately around us. Think about the problems surrounding Miklo, Paco, and Cruz, and how each of their personalities were shaped by them. Those themes of how our upbringing and environment shapes our personalities are in other movies too, like Boys in the Hood, or He Got Game. And a lot of times people share a similar environment. That's why people tend to joke or say that people from the same region tend to have the same temperament. Like the stereotype that people from New York are more rude or pushy, or that people from Alaska are more outdoorsy or they like the cold. Miklo's personality and that of the other two are largely their response to the problems they faced in their early childhood. So that's why I bring it up. And it's a huge theme the movie is aware of, except they use a different phrase to signify it, that our struggles shape who we are. They say La Raza, which means the people of this land, but the way that they use and mean it, it has an expanded meaning of the people of this land and its struggle. Part 2. Character Development. So a big strength of this movie is how characters grow and develop as time progresses. Character development is when characters grow and change, or sometimes they don't change when major life events happen. Character development reveals new things that were embedded in a person but never got the chance to flourish. Or sometimes a character makes sacrifices in order to hold on to something important, but then they have to let other things go. That can encourage growth and freedom too, though, when we stop holding on to certain things. Drop Dead Fred is a good example of that type of character development. So either of those are a type of character development. For those that know, this movie is one of the greatest examples and uses of character development ever portrayed. Other movies or examples might be The Count of Monte Cristo, Michael in The Godfather, Walter White in Breaking Bad. These are all great examples of characters that change a lot through the course of events. Normally, you have what are called dynamic characters and static characters. A dynamic character changes, whereas a static character stays the same. And most characters in movies are static by default, because they aren't on screen long enough to change. Yoda and Chewbacca are static characters. They don't change as the movies go on. They are just characters in the background, or characters that serve one function and then the movie leaves or abandons them. Luke Skywalker and Han Solo are dynamic characters. They change as the movies go on. They are not the same people we started with because experiences have changed them. I used to think in 7th grade that by dynamic and changing they meant characters' emotions and personality were all over the place, and it meant that they were bipolar or had multiple personalities. But really all it means is when experiences change who a character is. Like in The Last Samurai, where the main character had all of this apathy and prejudice against non-modernized people, but after living with them for a bit, we see firsthand the beauty of their way of life, and so he would be crazy or absurd to still hold on to those prejudices. And that's not the first movie to do that. There's like 100 other movies exactly the same, such as A Man Called Horse, Dances with Wolves, Avatar, basically any movie with settlers going to a new area, but I digress. The reason why I talk about that is because whenever character development unfolds in a movie or book in a way that is powerful and believable, it has a tendency to develop us as the consumer so that we develop as people too. That's why we're going to talk about how our triad of Paco, Cruz, and Miklo develop as characters so you can know what to look for and maybe notice a few more things next time you watch this movie. And I had to admit, I didn't expect to, but I actually got emotional during a few surprise moments during this movie. This movie is just so rich with little tidbits that I think resonate because we all had stuff like that happen in our lives and in our families. To me, Miklo has 3 major character development shifting points in the film. And yes, I'm aware that a lot of different things happen to him, but I mean, there's like 3 phases of Miklo throughout the movie. The first is before he joins Vatos Locos. The second is when he officially joins La Onda. And the third is when he returns to prison a second time. As established earlier, Miklo was a kid that always wanted to gain the acceptance of his peers, and he has the chance to live an easier life with his father, but he refuses to denigrate his fellow Hispanics, and prefers to live amongst the people that he has the most in common with. This very same theme ends up echoing later when Miklo refuses to join the Aryan Vanguard or simply pretend to be white for overall better treatment while in prison. That's twice Miklo could have done the easier thing and denied his Mexican heritage and just pretended to be white, but he makes strong choices as to who he is as a person, signified by him joining Vatos Locos and later by joining La Onda. By joining Vatos Locos, Miklo is sending a signal to the universe and to himself about what he stands for and who he wants to be. But without any real experience, it's just that, just a declaration. Through experiencing the requirements of that lifestyle and seeing what it takes, he reaches the next level, where at first he was just talking the talk, but now he's, walking the walk. So first he decided what he wanted to be, and by joining La Onda, he's figuring out how to be what he wants. And this is demonstrated by showing him run a successful criminal enterprise from within the prison. This lets us know that he's gone beyond a common street thug or soldier, and now he's an intelligent, clever, and connected criminal entrepreneur. His last phase, re-entering prison, is when he learns about what you have to sacrifice to be who you want. That scene where he shows back up in prison and he has the metal leg is one of the coldest criminal reveals ever in cinema. I get chills. It's like he's not even the same person from before in the beginning of the movie.
Miklo! What's up, shit? You looking good, homie?
Hopalong, you better tell Paolo. You better stop fucking with my business.
It's not in public.
I ain't gonna let no junkie rip off my customers.
Malcolm, time to...
Having sacrificed his leg, his freedom, I could just go on. And yet he finds himself back home in exactly the place he should be. You can just tell he's completely in his element, like a fish to water being back in prison. And we'll talk more about how Miklo sacrifices his mentor Montana in part 2, because that's a part of it. But anyway, sacrifice takes Miklo to the next level of his existence. And his story is such a powerful example of how, no matter where you find yourself, purpose and Onda can find you. It's like Miklo was born to be in San Quentin, as fucked up as that sounds. But his efforts greatly improved the safety and living conditions of his fellow peers, or La Raza. The whole scheme involving Montana, which I'll get more into in part 2 of this video, really shows how calculating Miklo is. To be able to see and predict several events in sequence, kind of like a prison Nostradamus. And it also shows how much his character has developed from the reckless kid who would do anything stupid on a dare. This scene involving him getting magic to stand down is important in the character development of showing that Miklo has developed patience, purpose, and intelligence with all of his actions. It's no longer about petty pride or reputation. This guy is a real leader now. So that concludes our Miklo section. Moving on to Cruz. So, his character develops a lot also. I think him chasing success and stardom through art sort of parallels him chasing relief from pain and guilt through his drug addiction. And I think that's why drugs and artistry are so synonymous with each other, unfortunately. I do think Cruz is a lot more passive of a character than Miklo, meaning more things happen to Cruz than happen through him. Like, Miklo's character just does a lot more stuff. I know it's not a contest, but I'm just saying. And I don't think Paco's as aware of a character as Miklo is either. But let's stick with Cruz just for now. I think a big turning point and character development point is when Paco confronts him about the death of Juanito a bit. As a kid, watching this movie every time it was on TV, I understood that Paco and the rest of the family have every right to blame Cruz for Juanito's death. Put it this way. If Juanito had died and it had been a random neighbor or person from the neighborhood that gave Juanito the drugs he OD'd with, all of them would want some sort of justice for what happened. Does what I'm saying make sense? But because they love Cruz, Paco and Miklo are willing to put that aside. It's a huge level of forgiveness. When Paco tells Cruz that he has no right to use Juanito in the painting, it seems like he's throwing Juanito's death in Cruz's face. And that's exactly how it feels to Cruz at first. But what he's really saying is that he can't use Juanito's death as an excuse to punish himself and be a drug addict. If he wants to be a drug addict, that's his own business. But if he really loved Juanito, Juanito wouldn't want him living like that and suffering in this way, so he should get clean for him then. Juanito wouldn't want Cruz becoming a drug addict or throwing away his talent. And Paco was telling Cruz that if he really loved Juanito, then he should get clean. But I think Paco is so emotional, I don't think even he knows it. But as you noticed, from here on out, we never see Cruz use drugs again. Maybe it wasn't overnight, but that's what put him on the path to sobriety. Now we'll take a look at Paco's character development. I know earlier I said Miklo is actually the more awake character, if that makes any sense. Miklo knows who he is. He has come to terms with his surroundings and he reigns like a king, even while in prison, having fulfilled his Onda. I know people will debate me because one is a criminal and murderer and the other is a respected police officer, but that's the genius and mystery of it, and let me explain. So a lot of the stuff Paco does is reactionary. It's in reaction to something. He joined the military, but deep down admits that he might have preferred being in prison. This suggests that his choices are not quite his own, but that maybe he felt pressure or even pressure from himself to prove how tough he was by joining the military. And don't get me wrong, it's tough to be in the military, especially Marines. But that doesn't mean that he wasn't scared or uncertain or that he never wanted to give up. And I think his character development is centered around realizing that he is afraid. And he's put up this tough guy image, but deep down he's a person with a lot of fears, vulnerabilities, and insecurities. Did you know that there was an extended story plot with Paco having a wife, and the two of them having marital problems from work stress? I forget all of the exact details, but I'm willing to bet These cut sequences would have expanded even more on this theme of Paco coming to terms with his vulnerability and insecurity. Even later becoming a narcotics officer is in reaction to his younger brother dying from that overdose. It's like Paco is constantly at war with something and needs an enemy to fight. So that's what Cruz and other people mean when they tell him that he hasn't changed one bit. And that's also what I meant earlier by calling Paco self-righteous. Paco has deliberately taken this career and life path just so he can have a very short-sighted and narrow view of things. And I'm not trying to diminish Paco, or the police for that matter, just for trying to save lives. What I am trying to point out is notice how Paco doesn't even treat the suspects like human beings. And this aggression very much mirrors the gangster violence he used to inflict and embody. Essentially, he's still just a gangster, but at least the difference is that he's trying to do something positive. What Cruz is trying to tell him in the final sequence is that, first of all, Paco doesn't have to act so tough. In fact, it might serve him in many ways not having to constantly project this image of toughness. He's already so naturally tough that there's no point in going even extra and pretending and doing reckless shit like this, or this, or this. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being a cop, but this sort of stuff is going to get him killed, and then he won't be very effective as a police officer. Does that make sense? How he's behaving is how a gangster thinks. There's no need for him to act that way. I almost thought of making a Venn diagram to show how Miklo and Paco are actually very similar in lots of ways, but my overall point is that if Paco realized he had a lot more in common with many of the criminals he deals with, he'd actually be a more effective police officer, and he should have taken Miklo's offer at the end of the film to team up. More lives could have been saved and bloodshed avoided. Paco would be like if the police got one vote in an organized crime syndicate. So this is what I mean by saying that he's too short-sighted and proud. He's not as awake as Miklo is. He could have teamed up with him, and Miklo could have pointed him towards so many other children like Juanito that might need help, but he didn't. This is what Cruz is trying to wake Paco out of. To conclude, this movie does a great job of showing you the good and the bad of our personalities and talents. That's the other thing I wanted to talk about very briefly. Not only do we have unique personalities, but we also have talents and hobbies. And if these talents are practiced enough, they take us on a life journey. For Cruz, it was his art. For Miklo, it was his ability to find ways to fit in and bring value. And for Paco, it was this gangster and marine toughness and bravery. The first one's in and the last one's out. What talents do you have? What journeys have you been on because of your talents and hobbies? If you watched all of this, go ahead and like and subscribe, because I have a part 2, and I do movies just like this all the time. Most movie YouTubers always try to explain the weird and scary movies, but here at Psychology and Movies, we go after the good stuff. And feel free to recommend other movies in the comments. I'm down sometimes. I'm Movie Review Justin, this is Psychology and Movies. Thanks for watching and stay healthy and informed.